Good evening and welcome to Spectrum News debate for New York's 18th Congressional District. I'm Susan Arbetter, political anchor at Spectrum News 1.
I'm Errol Lewis, political anchor for Spectrum News New York 1. We are coming to you live from Marist College in Poughkeepsie in the Nettie Galletti Theater here on campus. This program is being broadcast on all of our stations across the state.
The race we're focusing on tonight is considered pivotal as both Republicans and Democrats look to control the House of Representatives next year. Republicans currently hold a majority with 220 seats to Democrats' 212. There are 3 vacancies. 218 seats are required for a majority. Some of the most competitive races are right here in New York State, including tonight's contest, which is why we're broadcasting it statewide.
The 18th Congressional District covers all of Orange County and most of Ulster and Dutchess counties in the Hudson Valley. It includes Middletown, Newburgh, Poughkeepsie, and Kingston. Early voting begins a week from Saturday on October 26th, and Election Day, of course, is on November 5th. We are joined tonight by the 2 major candidates. Democrat Pat Ryan has been in Congress since 2022. He previously served as Ulster County Executive. Republican Alison Esposito is a retired NYPD Deputy Inspector and a former candidate for New York Lieutenant Governor.
Here are tonight's rules. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond to questions and will also be given the opportunity to respond if directly addressed by their opponent. We will also have a cross-examination round where each candidate will be able to ask his or her opponent a question. Plus, there will be a lightning round where the answers need to be short yes or no responses. You can also watch the debate on the Spectrum News app and NewYork1.com without a paywall. We begin now with our opening statements, and our order was determined earlier this morning by a random drawing. Alison Esposito will go first.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for hosting the debate. Thank you to Spectrum, and thank you to the students that are attending the debate. Marist College is certainly a beautiful campus, and we live in such a beautiful part of the Hudson Valley, especially in October and the changing of the seasons. So tonight, I am very, very happy to be introduced to you as your candidate for New York 18. I am not your traditional politician. I am a New York City cop, and I was for 25 years. But I saw the city, the state, and the country that I loved go upside down. And I had to walk away from my career to try to continue my public service and make a difference. I believe you're going to see a stark contrast here tonight. I am a public servant, and my opponent has been in politics for years. And you're going to see a vision for going forward, one that returns prosperity to our New Yorkers, one that lowers taxes and regulations, one that increases public safety, and one that secures our southern border. We owe our people safety, security, and prosperity. And I'm going to work hard every single day to be able to fight for that for the people of the Hudson Valley.
Thank you, Alison Esposito. Pat Ryan.
Hey everyone, Congressman Pat Ryan, and it's an honor to be with you all. It's been an honor to represent this community for the last 2 years, almost 2 years. The community where I was born and raised in Kingston, graduated proudly from West Point, where we're raising, my wife Rebecca and I, are 2- and 5-year-old boys. Hi guys, if you're watching at home. I am so proud of this community and everything that we stand for and everything that we are and where we're going. But we also have a lot of work to do. My mission the last 2 years, and I hope the next 2 years, is to really focus on 3 pieces. 1, make our community more affordable. Bring down the cost of living, housing, healthcare, gas, groceries, utilities, and prescription drugs, and more. 2, make our community more safe. And 3, make sure that our community remains free. I'm looking forward to having that discussion tonight. Alison, thanks. Looking forward to a vigorous and respectful debate. And to Marist and our host, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, candidates. We're going to begin with our first topic, which is migrants. According to Data USA, more than 95% of the residents of this congressional district are U.S. citizens, a very different situation than what we see nearby in New York City. But of course, border security, immigration, refugee and asylum policy are all major concerns everywhere in the country. I want to direct this first part of the discussion to you, Ms. Esposito. Your website makes frequent reference to, quote, illegal migrants, and you have also called for limits on asylum seekers who by definition are here legally seeking refuge in our country. Is there any form of immigration that you think would be good for the Hudson Valley?
Oh my God, yes. First of all, legal, lawful immigration is what this country was founded upon, but that's not what's happening now. We don't have traditional asylum seekers that are going through the ports of entry and following the international law to request asylum. What we have is a porous southern border, and it's impacting, it's unsustainable, and it's impacting our quality of life. It's impacting the quality of life for all Americans. There's billions of dollars going to fund, to feed, to clothe, to house, to care for illegal immigrants. And I believe we need a secure southern border. We need to work on immigration reform, but we need a secure southern border, and we need to do that right away. Now, my opponent may disagree. He was the Ulster County executive, and he did make Ulster County a sanctuary county and has refused to vote for border security. But right now, what we have to do is make sure that our Americans are being cared for. We have to seal secure that southern border, and then we have to work on reestablishing what legal, lawful immigration looks like and do proper immigration reform.
Okay, so just to clarify, a large number of the migrants who have been coming to this region are coming from places like Haiti, Ukraine, and Venezuela. They're seeking work permits. What should U.S. policy be towards those people who are afraid that if they stay in their home country, they might starve or die?
Again, there's a procedure. They go to a port of entry. They're supposed to stay in the first country that can accept them, that can grant them asylum, and that's not what's happening. They're just coming right over to America. What we need is to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. We need a secure southern border, and then they need to follow the ports of entry and not be paroled into the country where we don't know who they are. We have millions of illegal immigrants that have crossed our southern border. In fiscal year 2023, 300 known terrorists crossed our southern border. 400 crossed our northern border. This is not only unsustainable, it's dangerous. We need legal, lawful immigration, and we need proper immigration reform. But right now, what's going on with our open border policies from President Biden and Harris administration that my counterpart has been a rubber stamp for, this is absolutely unsustainable, and it is going to hurt us in the long run.
Okay.
In order to make sure that they are safe and protected, we have a humanitarian crisis at our southern border. There are 300,000 children that have been lost in this country, and we don't know where they are. We don't know what kind of hell they wake up to. We need to do better.
Oh, Mr. Ryan.
Look, I actually think we agree on the founding principle here, which is, one, we have to secure our border. That should not be a partisan or political thing. Unfortunately, the problem is it has become one. I have been one of a very small number, unfortunately, of Democrats willing to stand up to and call on and eventually call out President Biden for not doing enough to secure our border. Thankfully, he listened. We have seen the numbers come down in terms of folks crossing the southern border, but there's more work to do. This is the difference between pointing out a problem and working in good faith in a bipartisan way, which is what I've been doing the last 2 years to try to fix the problem. For example, I'm a proud co-sponsor, along with my colleague Republican Mike Lawler to the south, of the Dignity Act, the only comprehensive immigration reform bill in the House of Representatives. It would put more border security agents on the southern border and improve and expand the number of work visas so folks coming here can provide a better living and life for their families, just like my Irish ancestors did many generations ago.
Let me ask you a follow-up, Mr. Ryan. You voted against what's called Lakin's Law, which would have allowed local law enforcement to cooperate with federal immigration and customs enforcement, and also require ICE to detain any undocumented migrant who was charged or convicted with burglary, theft, larceny, shoplifting, low-level offenses included. Why did you vote that way? And what's the answer to those who are concerned about those issues?
The answer on this issue, border security and immigration, just like a lot of issues facing our country right now, is we actually have to do the work to not be partisans, but to actually work as patriots and try to have a lasting, durable, bipartisan solution to this. I wasn't able to, with the time I had, point out, but I want to make sure I point out, my opponent has opposed, along with Donald Trump, the only bipartisan Senate border security bill that had a real prospect of passing, that I supported, that would have actually solved the problem, that would have put more border security agents on the southern border, that would have stopped fentanyl coming into our community. And it was negotiated by one of the most conservative Republican senators in the Senate. And then it was, unfortunately for political reasons, and Donald Trump has said this directly, he ordered everyone not to vote for that, and so he's perpetuated the problem. I'm working to fix a problem, not fight about fixing the problem.
Okay, quick response, Mrs.
So again, this is where his actions and his words don't mirror. That Senate bill was never coming out. That Senate bill was dead on arrival because it codified into law reckless and dangerous Biden policies that he put in through the swipe of his pen in executive order. Pat Ryan had the opportunity to secure our southern border, and it would have provided funding to Border Patrol. It would have reinstated Remain in Mexico. It would have secured would have continued the border wall, and he voted against it. This is about putting party and politics before people, and that's exactly what he did.
Thank you. We're going to move on to race for president. Mr. Ryan, you are the first Democratic member of the congressional delegation to call for Biden to step aside. Your opponent has said that you were simply worried about Biden's electability. We were hoping that you could explain your decision to ask your party's standard bearer to step aside.
Yeah, that's a pretty rare thing, and something I certainly didn't arrive at lightly or quickly. At that time, after a really concerning debate at the end of June, I was hearing from constituents across the district that they were concerned about two things. One, the existential threat that Donald Trump poses to our democracy, and we saw this a few years ago on January 6th. And two, the ability for Joe Biden to prosecute that case fully and forcefully against Donald Trump. So I felt it was really, to your point, Allison, about putting country over party, a patriotic act and really responsibility to say we need someone who can put forth that best case. And we've seen that from Vice President Harris. Meanwhile, my opponent, I challenge her or you to ask her one place where she disagrees with Donald Trump, who she's been lockstep behind, a convicted felon who traitorously tried to incite an insurrection on January 6th.
Do you want to respond to that?
So again, this is the left rhetoric that actually got Donald Trump shot at. They call him an existential threat to democracy, yet he usurped 14 million Democrat voters that voted for Joe Biden. Not one voted for Kamala Harris to be the top of the ticket. And the reason wasn't patriotism. The reason was he saw he was going to lose an election. They saw that Donald Trump was going to be back in the White House, and they couldn't handle that. So he called for him to step down. We know that Biden has been struggling with mental problems, and he's not fit to serve today. Nonetheless, 4 years from now. But they saw that they were losing an election, and they are continuing to lie to the American people.
Redirect to Pat. Go ahead.
I don't even really know where to begin with that. Look, we have reached a point that transcends party and partisanship, I'm telling you. I wear this bracelet with the names of the fellow soldiers I lost in combat in Iraq. We owe them being honest about the fact that our democracy barely, thank God, held on January 6th, and that was a direct result of Donald Trump. It is important, in fact, that we do highlight that is an existential threat to our democracy,
Again,
and that's central to why I'm seeking this office.
I want to ask Ms. Esposito, former President Trump at times has struggled to basically not to lose his train of thought. Earlier this year, he confused former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi with UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, among other miscues. If elected, Trump would be even older than Joe Biden should he serve a full term. Are you worried about his mental fitness for the job?
I am not, but I was worried about Joe Biden's. Joe Biden had more than missteps. Joe Biden had more than senior moments. Joe Biden had more. He was confused 90% of the time. He does not have the mental acuity to serve as the President of the United States. You know, it's difficult to be up on a debate stage. It's difficult to answer questions to the media. Sometimes you do misstep and you misspeak, and that happens. But President Trump hasn't given any reason for us to doubt his mental acuity. Now, I look at President Trump and his policies, and you have to ask the question, are we better off now than we were 4 years ago? And the answer is no. So I don't have any doubt of President Trump's ability to serve, and I don't have any doubt about President Trump's loyalty to his country or his patriotism.
I just have a quick follow-up. Vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance today stated that he does not believe that former President Trump lost the election in 2020. Do you think Trump lost the election in 2020?
So I believe that President Trump lost the election in 2020, and I believe that the American people lost the election in 2020. Because by electing Joe Biden, we are less prosperous, we are less secure, we have a porous southern border. Inflation was at a 40-year high. The Fed rate is over 6. And the FBI numbers came out today, and everyone has been lying to us. Crime is actually up by a 6-point swing from what the Biden-Harris administration has said to us. So yeah, Trump lost the election, and so did the American people.
Thank you. We're going to move on.
Okay, our next area is going to be the economy. The economic recovery since the pandemic has been a blessing and a curse for many families. The price of many basic goods has gone up, including the price of housing. On the other hand, higher home sales prices also means higher property values, meaning that some residents of the district have actually seen their wealth increase. I wanted to ask, what are the economic policies that you think would most benefit the 18th district, and how would you advance those policies as a member of Congress? And we'll start with you, Ms. Esposito.
So it's in New York, on average, it's $12,000 more a year just for the same quality of living that we had just 4 years ago. Traveling the district, and even prior to this in the statewide, I heard throughout the counties that help us, please. We can't afford to live here. We're overtaxed. We're overregulated. Our small businesses are under attack. Help us, please. Our children can't afford to live here, so we're not going to get to see our grandbabies live here. And this is the American dream when it comes to housing and economy. What we have to do is roll back regulations. We have to have less taxes on our American people and get government's hands out of their pockets. You know, we can actually be energy independent in New York State alone, let alone the country, and be bringing prosperous jobs back here. In addition, the taxes, like the SALT cap, have to be removed. Now, President Trump has voiced that he will be removing it, and I'm very proud of my Republican colleagues because they keep putting forth fights to remove the SALT cap. In fact, Congressman Lawler and Molinaro put forth a raise on the SALT raise on the cap, and my opponent voted against it because they didn't want to give Republicans a win in an election year. It's unacceptable.
Mr. Ryan.
I'll answer the original question, but I would like to respond to that with some additional time. But more important than the back and forth between us is the fact that folks watching tonight, the cost of living, as I'm hearing from everybody across the district, our household included, is untenable. We've seen some progress to bring that down. We have a lot more work to do. So specific policies and things that we're working on to bring down costs. Housing, #1 driver of costs in our community. I proposed legislation to bring down interest rates and mortgage rates. Also called on the Federal Reserve, which thankfully they heeded our call, to bring down those rates, which will relieve some of that pressure. I introduced legislation to crack down on Wall Street speculators coming into the Hudson Valley, jacking up housing costs for all of us. On healthcare, I introduced important legislation against the objections of the big pharma lobby. It's called the Stopping Pharma Ripoffs Act to bring down prescription drug prices. I worked with my Republican colleague, Mark Molinaro, on the Lowering Grocery Prices Act to bring down food costs. And can I respond
briefly? Yes.
This is deeply concerning to hear one of, I think, what you'll probably hear a few mistruths from my opponent tonight. I am a proud member of the bipartisan SALT caucus, which is focused on raising and I would argue eliminating the SALT cap. This is double taxation for New Yorkers. And as a reminder, it's President Trump that actually put this in place. When the Democrats were in charge of the House, we passed lifting this. With the Republicans in the House the last 2 years, they have not been able to pass it. So with a House Democratic majority, I will proudly vote to lift this cap and relieve many, many of my constituents.
Okay. Let me ask you, actually, Mr. Ryan, I know you and 44 other members co-sponsored a bipartisan bill to repeal the SALT cap, but the measure never reached the floor. I believe it's still tied up in Ways and Means. What assurances can you give constituents that the cap will be lifted if you're reelected?
Unfortunately, we have seen the least productive Congress in my lifetime by all quantitative measures. Unfortunately, with Republican House leadership that are very extreme, and Speaker Mike Johnson, who, by the way, was in the district campaigning, unfortunately, for my opponent, we've been able to do very little, but thankfully avert shutdowns, mostly with Democratic votes to hold us from shutting down. And this is a perfect example, Errol. Well, if we had a functional House, we could pass this legislation that I'm a proud co-sponsor of, but instead they're bickering among themselves. So as I said, with a Democratic House majority, just like we did last Congress, we'll pass this again, and then we need to get it through the Senate. But I'm very confident with a Democratic House majority and a Speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, we can absolutely lift the SALT cap.
So yeah, a similar question, Ms. Esposito. If, as you hope, you're a member of a Republican majority in that House, what will have changed that would enable this cap to get lifted?
Well, like I said, Donald Trump has already said publicly that he is going to remove the SALT cap. My Republican counterparts have been fighting for it. But again, to the actions speak louder than words, the congressman had the ability to vote to raise the SALT cap, and he didn't do it at the behest of Hakeem Jeffries, who he has obviously paid homage to as the Speaker of the House. And talk about Mike Johnson, yes, he was in the district, and so was AOC, the most progressive member of the squad. Now, my far-left opponent believes that that will sell in the Hudson Valley, but I don't. So, like I said, actions speak louder than words. He had the ability to vote on the SALT Act, raising the SALT cap, just like he had the ability to vote for border protection. That's sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk. He also says he called on the Fed to drop the interest rates. First of all, when Biden took over, the Biden-Harris administration, interest rates were like 2.4 or something, just over 2. Now they've dropped to 6 point something. He called on the Fed. The Fed doesn't even know who Congressman Ryan is, okay? They dropped it because it was an election year, and that is what's going on with this party. Anything to win an election. It's unacceptable.
Okay. Briefly, Mr. Ryan.
I hope we can not have personal attacks here and debate the policy. To the important point on the SALT tax, I want to be very clear. This is a huge issue for 70% of my constituents. There has not been a single bill on the House floor this Congress, and you must be mistaken in your homework, Allison, to eliminate this cap. If it came to the floor, I absolutely would have voted for it. That's why I'm part of this bipartisan SALT caucus with my Republican colleagues and neighbors, and you can give them a call and ask them as well. So I do think it's important that folks know that.
Understood.
Thank you. What we're going to do now is do a cross-examination moment where you each ask each other a question, and we're going to start with Alison Esposito asking Pat Ryan a question. Go ahead.
Congressman, do you think it's acceptable for boys and men to compete against women in women's sports?
This is something I've thought a lot about as both a representative, but also as a dad. My 2 and 5-year-old are not quite. Actually, Theo's about to. He's doing swimming lessons and about to start soccer, we think. But look, I've centered my campaign on freedom, reproductive freedom, which I hope we'll talk about tonight in terms of how extreme my opponent is in pushing for a ban on abortion in New York, and the freedom for a family and a local school district and a community to make a decision about sports for our young people. I do not think the federal government from Washington, D.C. should be deciding those kinds of matters. We've got, as we've discussed, a lot of other issues to be working on.
Thank you. Pat Ryan, go ahead, ask a question of Alison Esposito.
So one of probably the single biggest constituent issue we've been dealing with in the district is this battle we've had with Central Hudson, our utility company that had a huge billing debacle, and in the midst of it has been trying to jack up utility costs. I'm really proud that my team and I have been helping thousands of people get their bills fixed, and we had just had a landmark settlement where Central Hudson now has to pay $62 million to make right by our community and by bill payers. While we've been battling to lower utility rates.
Is there a question here?
Yeah.
Allison's taken thousands of dollars from Central Hudson's lobbyists who are literally advocating to raise utility rates. So I think you need to explain that to the voters of the district.
Pat Ryan, it's the lack of integrity in almost all of his statements is absolutely ridiculous. First of all, the Green New Deal and the attack on energy is what's hiking up our energy bills, and it's absolutely ludicrous. We could be diversifying and energy independent not only in the country but in New York State, driving down the cost of electricity, driving down the cost of gasoline. natural resource extraction that's responsible and clean instead of paying billions of dollars overseas to our adversaries who are calling for death to America and death to Israel. This is absolutely ludicrous. While I was running with Congressman Lee Zeldin in 2022, there was a deal cut in Albany to allow for them to raise their prices on our consumers in exchange for no new gas hookups and applications for pipelines. This is absolutely ludicrous, and he's going to continue to try to sell you this. But if we diversify our energy and put our people first, we will drive down prices in this country, and our people will be prosperous.
30 seconds to Pat Ryan.
I didn't hear, I directly answered your question, Allison, and I would ask for you to answer my question. To remind you, and I hope you track who supports your campaign financially, a lobbyist who works directly for
Real
Central
quickly,
Hudson
do
that's
you
been
take
ripping
NYSEG
off
money?
our constituents. Can I finish my...
New York State Electric and Gas, wasn't that your question?
Central Hudson.
Central Hudson Gas.
And Allison, if you had lived in the district, you might know who Central Hudson is.
I have Orange and Rockland, so you only know of one in the district that serves. No, now you're being ridiculous.
Can I finish my question, please?
So he doesn't have a question, nor does he have
What is your question?
The direct question is, can you please explain why you took thousands of dollars of lobbyist money from the same lobbyists that are raising rates on my constituents in our community?
The lobbyists aren't raising rates. His attack on energy is raising rates in New York State and in the country. It's unacceptable. He's a progressive Green New Deal guy, and he doesn't have our best interests at heart.
We're going to move on to abortion. Alison Esposito, you have said that we should leave abortion questions to the states. Now, according to research from the Commonwealth Fund, in states that have banned, are planning to ban, or have otherwise restricted abortion, have fewer maternity care providers, more maternity care deserts, higher rates of maternal mortality and infant deaths, especially among women of color, and greater racial inequities among their healthcare systems. If elected, what would you do to correct that imbalance?
So we have the maternity healthcare deserts and the healthcare deserts as a whole are a problem in this country. But my opponent and the Democrats want to make this entire election about abortion. It's not on the ballot in New York State. As a federal candidate, I cannot and will not change New York State laws, and I do not advocate for a federal abortion ban. What I do advocate for is greater access to adoption, better access to IVF, and what I want is to empower women all across the country by giving child tax credits and empower women and babies on every stage of pregnancy and beyond to be able to make this very difficult choice. No one should ever have to say, I have to have an abortion because it's my only option. I want to empower women and the babies throughout stages and make it easier to make this choice.
All right, this is tough, but do you said empower the states to make their own decisions. Okay. That means that, I guess the question is, what would you say to a young woman in Alabama who becomes pregnant after she's raped and wants an abortion? There are some states where abortion isn't legal.
So it's working through the states right now, and I don't believe that, at least that I know of, that there's any state that would force an 11-year-old who was raped to have an abortion, and I disagree with that. I absolutely disagree with that. Rape, incest, life of the mother, there are obviously times that abortion is necessary, and I will fight to protect the life of the mother at any point. But again, this has been returned to the states. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said it was a flawed decision and it wouldn't last. It was returned to the states. Now the states can vote on it. I am somebody who believes in less government, not more. Local control. You vote for your elected officials in the states, and that's how the laws happen.
Thank you. To Pat Ryan, New York's Reproductive Health Act allows abortion up to 24 weeks, and after that point, only if a woman's life or health is in danger. Would you ever support expanding the act to simply leave the decision up to a patient and her doctor in every instance? In other words, trust women.
I agree with you, Susan, that we've heard a lot of words there from my opponent, but the core question here is about one of freedom. Is it the decision of a woman and their doctor, not any politician, certainly no one in Washington, D.C.? That is what is at stake. 2 years ago, the Supreme Court, thanks to Donald Trump, who's literally bragged about this, ripped away a fundamental freedom from half this country. The candidate that you so proudly support, Allison, and then when you ran for statewide office, you supported legislation called the Life at Conception Act, which in New York would have explicitly banned abortion even in the case of rape or incest or threats to the life of a mother. So you can talk about states' rights. We're seeing women die in Georgia, in Alabama, and in 20 states, and you have been on the record wanting to hurt our community and women in our community whose lives may be at risk.
So,
30 seconds, Alison.
There's no legislation that I have passed or voted for. I have never had any issue with rape, incest, life of the mother. I believe that life starts at conception, but that doesn't mean that you cannot have an abortion in rape, incest, life of the mother, or for any reason. This is the lies that my opponent is putting forth. He wants to make it about abortion because his policies have been a failure. He's been a rubber stamp for the Biden-Harris administration, and he will continue to put party and power before people. He does not have the people's best interest at heart.
Thank you. Pat Ryan, you can respond to Alison Esposito. I also want to know if you would support a Senate vote to end the filibuster, to codify Roe.
The reason that we're talking about this is not anything that I want or don't want. The reason we're talking about this is because my constituents and women in this community and across the country are rightly pissed because their freedoms were literally ripped out from under them to the point that the generations being born now have less rights and freedoms than the one that came before. That is, I believe that's un-American. It's certainly not the country I risk my life to protect and defend. And it is essential that we speak up. And again, I think this is something that freedom is something that transcends partisanship or party. And so with all due respect, Alison, I'm not trying to make this about anything. I'm advocating for the freedom of my constituents, and unfortunately, you're on the wrong side of that. In terms of the filibuster, Susan, look, we're seeing the Senate on a bunch of issues, including protecting reproductive freedom, fail to 70% of the American people support this policy. So I think that has to be on the table, and that's not something I say lightly.
Okay, candidates, we're going to move on to public safety, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Ryan. Congress does not handle local law enforcement directly, but what can you say you have done in the last 2 years that directly impacts on the crime rate in the 18th district? And if reelected, what else would you plan to do?
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredibly important issue that I hear from constituents and important to me, especially as a dad. I was literally this morning proudly standing with here in Dutchess County with the Dutchess County Sheriff, the Dutchess County District Attorney, the Dutchess County Executive, 2 of 3 of whom, by the way, are Republicans, talking about the fact that I've delivered consistently funding and support for our local law enforcement. This morning we announced over $3 million in direct federal funding to make sure that we help those victims of rape and domestic violence and focus on hate crimes. That's in addition to $2 million just a few months ago that we delivered to bring a real-time crime center here to Dutchess County. Over the last 2 years, I've delivered tens of millions of dollars to our local law enforcement. It's the reason, I believe, or part of the reason, I'm the only one on this stage that has the endorsement of any of the 3 county sheriffs here, and I'm very proud to have the endorsement of Ulster County Sheriff Juan Figueroa.
Okay, Ms. Esposito, same question.
Yes, Pat has the endorsement of one county sheriff. I have more than a dozen law enforcement endorsements. I was a cop for 25 years, and I saw firsthand soft on crime, pro-criminal policies like my opponent advocates for. While I was in the riots of 2020, while the cities were burning all across the country, my opponent was marching with defund the police, with protesters that were yelling F the police. Now, he can throw in a curse word here or there to try to appeal to the American public, but he's not serious. He has voted, while he was Ulster County Executive, he stopped cooperation with ICE and law enforcement. While he was Ulster County Executive, he defunded his own SWAT team. While he was Ulster County Executive, he wanted to strip away protections of police, weapons in the hands of police that he calls weapons of war, any military-style equipment. Now, these are weapons of defense, shields, vests, armored cars, things that police need to do an incredibly difficult job with the tact and the professionalism and the empathy that we as a society request. He is not serious. He is a soft on crime, pro-criminal advocate, and it's unacceptable. In Congress, we need somebody to stand up and back our men and women in blue who are doing an incredibly difficult job.
I'm going to give him a chance to respond, but again, what in particular would you do? If you're elected, you're sworn in January, what would you do?
So we don't defund our police. We need to fund them and give them the training, the resources, and the equipment that they need to do an incredibly difficult job. I believe in a law enforcement Bill of Rights. I believe in qualified immunity. I believe if woke and progressive district attorneys, like New York City's own Alvin Bragg, that's refusing to cooperate crime, if you have a cop killer or an assault on a cop that's not being prosecuted, then I want to make it a federal offense. We need to make sure that we are respecting our law enforcement. Assaults on cops are going up every single year, and it's unsustainable. And in order to keep our men and women doing the job that society needs them to do, we need to make sure that they have our full support and backing.
Okay. Mr. Ryan, did you want to respond?
Well, we agree on that, and that's, as I said, why I have been very proud to deliver tens of millions of dollars of that resources and funding and support. Rhetoric matters, of course, and I proudly support and stand with law enforcement across our community. I spend a lot of time with our sheriffs, with our local law enforcement leaders, police chiefs, and I thank them, and I thank you too, Alison. I mean, I thank you for putting your life on the line as a police officer, and I think that's important. It also matters to have results and to deliver that funding and to have law enforcement's back in that way. And unfortunately, I hope it was unintentional, but in a recent interview, my opponent actually claimed to have the endorsement of local law enforcement. I know you have a lot of support from New York City, and I appreciate that, but here in the Hudson Valley, again, I think it's important for folks to know results matter and relationships matter, and working with local sheriffs, I'm the only one that's actually earned that support here in our community.
So again, the state FOP has endorsed one of many law enforcement entities that have endorsed me. He got a sheriff to endorse him, that's great. It doesn't take away from the fact that he has defunded. Actions, again, speak louder than words. Now he's going to concentrate on things like me saying I had the support, or rather the endorsement rather than support. I have the full support of the Orange County Sheriff, who's actually done fundraisers for us. Again, he's going to concentrate on small things like that, and it's smoke and mirrors, so that you are distracted from what he's actually done, which is nothing to back law enforcement when you're taking away necessary resources from them to be able to do the job that is so dangerous without taking shields and vests and calling weapons in their hands war weapons. Unacceptable.
Real quick, Mr. Ryan.
I have to respond to that. As Ulster County Executive, I think what you're referring to, I increased every single year the funding for our Sheriff's Department and local law enforcement, and our sheriff has validated that, and I'm sure we'll be happy to do so. Again, I think that's important. Again, it's about materially delivering, not heated rhetoric.
Okay.
We're going to move on to the lightning round, and we're going to ask each of you a question and ask, you guys come up with a yes or no or very short answer, okay? We're going to start with Alison Esposito. Have you ever voted for a member of the opposite political party, and if so, who? This will be more than one word answer.
Nothing is coming, I'm not sure. Nothing is coming to mind.
Done and done. How about you?
Yes, I grew up actually in a Republican household. The first time I voted for president, I voted for Republican.
Thank you.
Mr. Ryan, if there's a Subway Series, who will you root for, the Yankees or the Mets?
We have had, I know there's been an intense debate.
We've done this.
We have had a fierce debate about a potential Subway Series, and as you might expect, we're on different sides here. But my Yankees are up 2-0, and hopefully they carry it over. But we're rooting for the Mets tonight. I know we're the warm-up act for the Mets at 8 o'clock. So let's go Mets until we get to the series.
Ms. Esposito.
So I am a Mets fan, and it's very difficult at times, but yes, I am a Mets fan.
What's your favorite restaurant in the district?
A limoncello. It's in Goshen, and I love it. Or the Stagecoach. Limoncello. The Stagecoach. Limoncello.
I remember this question from 2 years ago.
Yeah, I love this question.
I struggled with it. Garvin's in New Paltz. I was just there last night, actually.
Oh,
beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Ryan, should New York City Mayor Eric Adams step down in light of his federal corruption indictment?
There's 82 mayors here in this district. That's who I'm primarily focused on. I think in terms of the New York City mayor, he's owed due process. Serious concerns and accusations, but this is still a country of rule of law, and I think that process has to play out.
I'll take that as a no. Ms. Esposito.
So as long as he can get the job done, and I would disagree that he's getting the job done, but as long as he can still maintain his office, he is allowed due process. I echo the Congressman's sentiments. I'm incredibly unnerved at the accusations, but he is allowed due process.
When was the last time you rode Metro North?
Metro North, probably 10 years ago.
How about you,
I
Pat
like my
Ryan?
car. I like my car.
Less than about a week ago, I'd say.
Okay.
I'm a big Metro North fan.
Yeah, okay. Ms. Esposito, have you received or will you be getting this year's COVID vaccination?
I have not received it, and I do not plan on getting it.
Mr. Ryan.
I haven't gotten it yet. My wife has been on me to do that and the flu vaccine, so I need to do that.
Have you used marijuana over the last year, Pat Ryan?
Not over the last year, no. Well, I like the way you phrase that, Susan. I appreciate that.
Alison Esposito, how about you?
So no, and now that I'm a retired cop, that's probably the first question that everybody asks me. But I won't even use the CBD bomb. I'm afraid I'm going to, get drug tested. It's still too many years in the NYPD.
A variation on that question: has the state's legalization of recreational marijuana been a success? Do you think, Ms. Esposito?
So I don't want to see marijuana over-criminalized, and I definitely don't want to see kids serving time in jail. But what I am seeing is the leniency of our drug laws right now. You see kids waiting for school buses, smoking a joint, and I don't think that they can be productive in school when it's that lenient. So I think we have to kind of crack down on it. Like I said, I don't want to see kids going to jail for marijuana use, but I also want to make sure that we're not hurting them in the long run.
Okay, Mr. Ryan.
I agree with the legalization, decriminalization. The rollout, though, especially here in the Hudson Valley, where we have a lot of small businesses that wanted to open dispensaries and a lot of production facilities, has been a mess. So I've been pushing on the state to fix that process. It's getting a little bit better, but we have a lot more work to do. It's a big economic opportunity, as well as the opportunity in terms of criminal justice reform.
Okay, and I guess as a final lightning round question, Mr. Ryan, will you vote yes or no on Proposition 1, the Equal Rights Amendment that protects against unequal treatment for New Yorkers?
I'll vote yes to protect abortion rights, LGBTQ rights, disability rights, and Alison said abortion is not on the ballot. It is literally on the ballot in New York, so please flip over your ballots and vote to protect reproductive freedom here in New York State.
So abortion's not even in Proposition 1. Outcome of pregnancy is, which isn't at job interviews. What this will do will be pave the way for boys to play in girls' sports, pave the ways for illegals to vote in our election. I am going to be voting against Proposition 1, and as a member of the gay community, it's not about LGBTQ rights. It's about fairness in sports, security in locker rooms, and it is about allowing parents to decide what's best for their children. So no on Proposition 1.
We're going to move on to foreign policy, and we're going to start with you, Pat Ryan. And this question is going to go to both of you. The U.S. is sending a missile defense system, about 100 troops, to aid Israel's defense against Iran. Do you support such a move? Why or why not?
I do support it. We're sending a THAAD, Theater High Altitude Air Defense System, and it's necessary. We've seen 2 unprecedented direct attacks from Iran, a terrorist regime, against our closest ally in the Middle East, where we share both democratic values and interests with Israel. I've proudly voted to support them through this and through the other attacks that they've suffered, and I think we do need to send them. The one thing I think we have to be cautious of, though, I understand the need to deploy these 100 U.S. troops, but that's something I'm going to be watching very carefully from my seat on the Armed Services Committee to make sure that we're really very, very thoughtful about deploying our own U.S. Young men and women into harm's way.
Thank you. Same question to Alison Esposito.
So I would agree with that sentiment. I mean, we need those 100 troops because of the manner that which they're being deployed for our weapons systems. But I don't want to see any unnecessary boots on the ground in any war overseas, and I believe, or any war outside of the country. And unfortunately, we do have troops in harm's way to this day because of failed Biden policies and a poor footing on the world stage, which has emboldened Russia to go into Ukraine and Hamas to attack Israel. So again, it has to be watched. I do understand that with the necessity to have those 100 troops over there, but I want to make sure that we do everything we can to protect and support our men and women who are serving in our armed forces.
Back to Pat Ryan, do you think Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is holding up a possible Gaza ceasefire agreement for his own political purposes?
I seriously worry about that. I've said that publicly for months. I've been pushing, most importantly, for a return of our hostages, a cessation of the violence, which I hope every person and human and American would be pushing for, and for us to ultimately get to a lasting peace in the region. And I think increasingly Benjamin Netanyahu's interests are not aligned with that. So we have to continue to press him to do that. To be clear, though, that's very different than questioning the importance and the necessity of Israel to protect and defend its people, which I staunchly support.
Alison Esposito, in one of your recent campaign emails, you expressed an urgent need to vote for Republicans because, quote, war is breaking out globally due to America's lack of presence on the world stage. But according to Pew, 62% of Republicans say that the U.S. does not have a responsibility to help Ukraine defend itself from Russia's invasion. How would a Trump presidency lead to a greater U.S. presence on the world stage?
So just 4 short years ago, there were no wars erupting around the world. We didn't have the sexual atrocities and the terrorist attack that happened in Israel. In fact, we were on the brink of peace in the Middle East under the Trump administration. It's because of the Biden-Harris lack of footing on the world stage. They have emboldened Iran. Iran was being strangled through sanctions. They are the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And now, because the Biden administration has emboldened them and paid them off to appease them, because that is the way they deal with foreign affairs, Iran is now strong, and we have terrorist attacks around the world. We had attacks on U.S. soldiers in the Red Sea. Again, you have to make sure that it's peace through strength. And 4 short years ago, they promised under the prior administration that we'd be in World War 300 by the end of the administration. But there were no new wars that broke out. And that's incredibly important, especially when we're sending troops into harm's way. We have to do everything we can to protect our men and women in the armed forces.
Thank you. You want to redirect?
Well, I just think it's an important question that you asked that unfortunately my opponent didn't answer, which is, would we support funding to Ukraine? And I watched in Congress across the aisle, more than half of the Republican Party turn their back on our Democratic allies, Ukraine. And then I watched, which is unbelievable, Donald Trump literally say, I'll let Russia do, quote, whatever the hell they want when it comes to Ukraine. So I do think, I hope Alison will address that. Yes, we do have to stand with our allies, and I'm proud that I did that repeatedly, funding aid to Ukraine to defeat Putin, aid to Israel to deter and defeat Iran, and aid to our allies in Taiwan to deter China. And I think this is something that the modern day Republican Party really has to wrestle with if you're serious about peace through strength, which I agree with you on, Alison.
So I want to
again,
ask
no,
you
again,
about Ukraine. Is the war in Ukraine a major threat to U.S. interests, and if so, why?
Well, absolutely. Russia is a threat to U.S. interests, and that's just, you have to listen to Putin. If he says he's going to go into Poland, he's going to, and we have to make sure that we stand up for our allies and do what's best for them. However, you have, once again, actions and words not mirroring. He says that he supports Israel and their right to defend themselves. But after the atrocities that happened, he voted against aid to Israel a month after the atrocities happened because there was IRS agents that were going to go after the middle class, and he didn't want to take funding. So a standalone bill was put forth by the Republicans, and again, he voted against it just the next month. He voted against condemning the anti-Semitism. He was quiet when it was happening on our colleges' campuses, even in the district, while they were taking over bridges. If we're serious about supporting our allies, then we actually have to do that. You have to vote, or you have to condemn from the river to the sea. You have to speak up when it happens. Israel has every right to defend itself, and there can be a ceasefire tomorrow if Hamas surrenders, lays down their weapons, and releases our hostages. We have Americans over there.
Yeah, redirect to Pat Ryan. There was a lot there.
There was a lot there. We agree on 99% of that. Still did not answer the question, though, about Ukraine. And specifically, the president, which again, Allison, throughout this debate or prior to debates, I've yet to hear a single thing with which you disagree on that you disagree with Donald Trump on. This would be, I think, a great opportunity to say you disagree with him, that Russia can, quote, do whatever the hell they want when it comes to Ukraine.
You call on people to do things and you think that that's actually disagreeing with them. Now, I am not a rubber stamp for Trump in any way, manner, or facet. And I don't believe that Russia should be able to do whatever the hell they want in any situation. But that's not what's on the agenda here. That's not what's at stake here. The problem is this man will tell you one thing and then vote another way. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing.
So I want to let Pat Ryan finish his moment.
Votes and results matter, as I've highlighted throughout and been specific on both issues of local law enforcement, the border, the SALT tax. I voted, as I said, to send aid to Ukraine. Still haven't said if you disagree with President Trump, and that is an existential issue for our democracy. It's clear to me Putin will, if given that green light from Donald Trump, God forbid, if he is commander-in-chief again, he would continue his march in a way that I think very scarily rhymes with what we saw almost a century ago in Europe, and we cannot allow that.
Okay,
Congressman is reckless at this point with the existential threats.
We're gonna move on to our final topic of the night, which is climate and energy. 2023 saw record-breaking heat and extreme weather. This district, of course, was not spared. Over the summer, there was flooding at the West Point Military Academy that damaged bridges, dams, roads, and buildings, with economic losses estimated at $100 million. So this question is for both of you. As these what were once in a century weather events become more common, how do you suggest that we pay for the almost constant rebuilding and remediation costs? And we'll start with you, Ms. Esposito.
Well, again, we have to make sure that we are diversifying our energy, bringing jobs back here. The more jobs that are back here, the more economy is back here, the more small businesses, the more corporations that are back here, the more revenue we get. We'll be able to pay for more things. Now, right now, we have an issue where we have tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and FEMA is not appropriately responding to it. We're spending millions and billions of dollars on illegal immigration that can be used right here at home. We're spending millions and billions of dollars on buying votes under the Biden administration and forgiving debt. And that is all things that we could use to rebuild infrastructure, to make sure that we're concentrating on the bridges, on the roadways, making sure that our people are safe, regardless of whether it's a natural disaster or, because of our porous southern border, any other kind of a disaster. We have to make sure that we are putting money back into our communities in a respectful or responsible way and supporting our New Yorkers. That, and our Americans actually as a whole. And you saw failures on every front with FEMA in the last few weeks, and they have to be held accountable as well.
Let me ask you about that. I've heard you say this in other forums. You're referring to the Shelter and Services Program, where FEMA distributes grant money from Customs and Border Protection to municipalities that have seen an influx of migrants, not to the migrants themselves. You think that money should have been used differently?
Well, I don't think we need it if we had a secure southern border. I think that we're using American taxpayer money to house, to clothe, to help municipalities that are sanctuary cities and states and counties that shouldn't be. And that money is for American citizens, for American disasters. We have to make sure that we're putting our people first, the people of our district, the people of our state, and the people of our country. Now, again, legal, lawful immigration, I support. But that's not what's going on here. And we are putting money in buckets that shouldn't be when our Americans need it here.
Okay. Mr. Ryan.
Somehow we started with a local, specific question about a storm in Orange County, where I was on the ground in Cornwall, at West Point, Fort Montgomery, Highland Falls, looked those families in the eye who still are owed individual assistance from FEMA. And I've called out that failure directly to the FEMA administrator in a hearing in the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and I will continue to press her on that. I stood with our great local, county, and state public service crews as they, thanks to funding we did secure from FEMA, reopened the Popolopen Bridge over 9W, just reopened 213, wrapping around Storm King Mountain from Cornwall to West Point. So I don't know how we got from there to sort of conspiracy theories about mistruths about FEMA money. That's the problem, I'm telling you. That's the problem in DC right now. You didn't hear one thing about the victims of a devastating, tragic flood in our community. We've got to step up funding to FEMA, equip them to deal with what are now once-in-a-century storms happening almost every year. And there's a big part to addressing climate change there that you also didn't hear from my opponent.
Again, he didn't answer that
Let me follow up with you, Mr. Ryan. Though. What's the long term? If we're going to have these once-a-century storms every 36 months, what's the funding source? What's the strategy?
I think it's very simple. The people that are polluting have to pay. I stood just a week ago with a group of local, state, and federal officials in a bipartisan way saying we in the Hudson Valley have been paying, all of us, taxpayers, whether that's cleaning up GE PCBs from before I was born, whether that's stopping the dumping of radioactive nuclear waste into the Hudson River, and a whole host of other issues, PFAS in Newburgh and across this district. The people, the corporations that are making record-breaking profits, they have to pay. I support both state and federal legislation to hold corporate polluters accountable rather than passing that cost on to all of you all, or just cutting or holding even funding for FEMA, which is what the House Republicans have tried to do the last 2 years.
Did you want to respond?
No, we have to, look, again, there was a whole bunch of words, and he talked about a local storm. The question was about how are we going to continue to pay for these storms in in all of America? And I believe I answered that. We have to make sure that we are investing in infrastructure, we are holding FEMA accountable for what they're doing, and we have to stop reckless and wasteful spending. We had to stop the Bidenomics, which my counterpart supports here. This is about putting money back into America and not just recklessly spending it. And unfortunately, the congressman likes to say things like bipartisan, but he was standing with the member of the progressive left squad while he was doing this. He's just talking about smoke and mirrors, and there's no real headway done under his
Let me ask you, we have only a couple of minutes left, but look, after Superstorm Sandy, there were some very hard discussions that were held in this region about whether or not people should rebuild in certain areas. And there was talk, I think at the state level, of acquiring some of the land, making people whole, but not throwing endless billions of dollars into areas that were determined to be floodplains and vulnerable. Are those kind of hard conversations something that you're willing to lead in this district?
Which one?
Either, both of you.
Absolutely. I think, though, in our area, unlike New York City, the conversation is very different, and I've been leading this actually both with local community leaders and on my role in the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, which oversees this funding. I've been pushing the Army Corps of Engineers, which is doing a study after Sandy to think about how do we do this differently. Highland Falls, for example, that was devastated by these floods, is literally on the side of a mountain. They're not in any floodplain in the normal modeling, but we're in a different world, and we need FEMA and other weather planners and the Department of Homeland Security to be updating those models. None of those folks had flood insurance, because in the last forever, they would have never needed it, and we need to step up our game to meet the moment.
Yeah, these are difficult questions that have to happen. Of course, you want people to be able to stay in their homes, but you want to make sure that they're there safely, and there's no possibility or probability of danger, and we're making sure that we're rebuilding infrastructure. And we are taking a hard look at whether it's a side of a mountain or whether it's in a flood zone, or it doesn't matter where the home is or where the business is located. We have to make sure that we're doing our best. And sometimes there are hard discussions that have to happen, and we have to say, you know what, this is no longer hospitable or able to be, I'm losing my word. Habitable.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Habitable. It's no longer habitable. But that's not where we want to go right away. We want to make sure that people have the opportunity to stay in their homes, and when we can make them whole, we have to make them whole.
Okay. Well, that is going to do it for this debate. We'd like to thank both candidates for joining us tonight. If you missed any part of the debate, it will be available in its entirety on the Spectrum News app.
Next week on October 23rd, we're also going to bring you a debate between the two major candidates running for U.S. Senate. Democratic incumbent Kirsten Gillibrand and Republican Mike Saperone will face off in a debate in 1 week live from the University at Albany. We're going to be there moderating the debate, both Errol and me. It starts at 7 p.m.
Please remember to vote. Early voting begins on October 26th. Election Day, of course, is November 5th. On behalf of Spectrum News 1 and New York 1, thank you for watching and have a great evening. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.